Hello and welcome on how to install Ubuntu 20.04. So what we have here is the default installer. This is what you will see when you first launch the installer. In my case, we are selecting English, and these are the options. We can install it, or we can try without installing. We can test memory, or we can boot from hard disk. In this case, we just want to install Ubuntu. Please excuse my four-legged assistant if you hear her. So now what we have here is the default Ubuntu installer. In my case, I will just tell it to skip the disk check because this is a brand new disk and I know that it is fine, so I do not need to worry. Now this is just doing the basic install setup, well, the preparation for the install. So what this is doing is it's just loading everything it needs to load before proceeding onwards. If we could see what it was doing, it would have a list of things that we'd be going through rather fast, but in this case we can't see it. So we just have to hope that it is indeed doing what it says it's doing. So whilst this is going on in the background, it's preparing, like I said, it's preparing everything it needs to prepare. Depending on your system, this will depend on how long it takes. Because I am running this in a QEMU KVM, QEMU/KVM virtual machine, this is as close to bare metal as I can get. So this is what you will experience in the real world as well. So now that that's completed, we are now met with a screen. You do not need to worry about a black screen, just you have to give it a chance and wait for it to complete. There is no reason to worry at black screens on installers unless it hangs for a very, very long time. But that 30-second hang, there's no reason to worry. So this here is actually correct. This is what you will see when you attempt to install Ubuntu yourself. In my case, mine says it is the May the 15th at 5:13 in the morning, when in actual fact it is the 15th at 3:13 in the afternoon. So because the reason why it's like that for is because when I downloaded this ISO, I was initially in the United Kingdom when I downloaded this ISO, so that's why it's having a fun time with the time. So again, this hanging is expected, so don't worry about it. It does happen. You need not worry. Now this will ask for what language you want to choose and localization. In this case, we can just say do not do any localization and just use the UTF-8 standard. But in my case, I don't want to choose anything other than English. There is a lot of choices for hopefully your language if you're not native English. So now that we have selected continue, what it'll then do is just do a quick locale and then set everything as needed. Now we could read the release notes if we fancied it, but in my case I don't want to. Now, because I am in Australia, I will select the Australian keyboard, and this will then update this side as well, so it's just English Australian, English Australian. Now, depending on where you are in the world, it is important to choose correctly because the symbols are in different places. For instance, on my keyboard, there is no button right of the left shift key except for Z. In the UK, the right of the left shift key would be a backslash. That does not exist in this format in this keyboard, on Australian keyboards. So it's important you check. See, we have slashes and we have pipes. That would normally be there on a UK keyboard, but it's not. So that's why it's important to choose the correct keyboard. Now that we have chosen the correct keyboard layout and the correct keyboard for us, in this case just a usual WASD or QWERTY keyboard layout, in my case I will be choosing minimal installation. The difference between minimal and normal installation is the minimal installation does not download Office software or games or media players such as VLC, Media Player or Minesweeper, or some of the basic games you get with an operating system such as Ubuntu. Now, in the process of installing this, we have a choice. We can either download download the updates whilst installing. In my case, I am selecting no, but you can select yes. It's entirely up to you, your patience, and your internet speed. And then the install third party. You may need this if you have an NVIDIA graphics card, a Realtek wireless card, or anything that is not standard motherboard or add-in hardware that may not be included with the default kernel. So now that we've made our choices, we will now select continue. At any point in time, we can just hit quit and back out the entire process, and then we won't be able to continue any further. We will have to reboot the system if we choose quit at this point. Now that this is preparing to install, it is important that you do not restart your system or attempt to turn off your system in any way, shape, or form until the install process has completed. Now, the reason for this is you may end up accidentally corrupting your new install or preventing your install from working in the future. Now, what this is doing is it's just setting up some more preparation in the background. This will be this, for example. So in my case, because I only have one disk, what we want to choose is erase disk and install Ubuntu. Now, we can choose to do something else where we can do it ourselves, or just have the one. In this case, we will go with just the one. So what we want to do is select install now, and then it will then do again some more preparation. This will ask us where we want to install, how we want to install it, and if we want to choose the entirety of the space available to us. In this case, yes, we want to choose the entire available space. During this step, if you do have another disk or partition in your system, it will show you it, because what it is doing is it's doing this. If you continue the changes listed below, it'll then write on partition 1 and 5 of virtual disk 1. So in my case, it's VDA. In your case, it'll be SDA. Because mine is in a virtual machine, it shows up as VDA, so don't worry, yours will say SDA. And then it will then format this one as blank and this one as the ext4 file format. In this case, we just select continue and we move forward. Whilst doing this, it should show you what disks you have installed, as well as what operating systems you have on them. This will do a grub OS prober to see what operating systems you have available on your system. This screen is just for setting the time zones. As you can see, the world is not evenly split into these lines at all. There is nothing even about this. As you can see, Iceland is in the GMT time zone, even though it's closer to Greenland. So in this case, you just click on the part of the world you want to choose. There's Pitcairn, there's also this. There's also Port Stanley on the Falklands, as well as South Georgia, which again falls under the United Kingdom. But in my case, we just want this one. In this case, it shows up as Sydney, no matter there's Brisbane, Melbourne, and then Sydney. So in my case, we just select Sydney. We will now select continue. So this will then load up any final locale settings as well as timing, and then it'll then go through the process of getting that set up. I can show you this process on a more granular level with Arch Linux. So in this case, it's going through the basic, do you want to add, what's your name, password, and all that such. So in this case, we're just going to go Ubuntu. This is the computer name, and it then asks what's on the network. So in this case, we will just go cheesebag, and this will then show up as cheesebag according to everything else. So anything else that then asks the network what's there. And in this case, we're just going with a password of Ubuntu and Ubuntu. I would recommend choosing something significantly more secure. And we'll log in. We are not using anything Active Directory based this time around, so we will not select use Active Directory. But this is what we're using to move forward. We now click next, and this will then start the install process, and this is the point where we can then see the granular step by step of what's going on. So as we can see here, XDG runtime directory run user and 999 is not owned by user identity 0 but user identity 999. If you tried to connect to non-root pulse 8, so this is just going through the install process, and it's throwing the usual errors of I don't know what's going on. So as we can see here, it's just what we started with, and it's actually now showing it. It was just running in the background this entire time. It's just only now as it's showing us. So as we can see, it is slowly moving forward at a decent pace. Now, again, this will absolutely vary based off of how much RAM your system has, how much storage, what CPU you have, how many cores you have, what speed your CPU runs at, and what speed your RAM runs at. Because this is a intense process on your system, it will vary wildly depending on your system. Now, if you run this on a 15-year-old system, expect it to be slow. If you're running it on a supercomputer, again, it'll also be slow because it has to take into account everything. So just standard system of 8 cores, 16 gigs of RAM. This is an ideal scenario that we're running this in. It's on a SLC cache NVMe drive, running on a Ryzen 9 5950X with 32 gigs of RAM. So as such, what this is doing is it's running on an ideal scenario. So what you see here may not be what you get in the real world, but this is a demonstration of what it is reasonable to expect. So in this case, it's just copying across the files it needs to copy across from the ISO to the actual disk. In this case, it's virtual disk 1. And you can just see it's setting up, starting up, and moving things around as is needed. As we can see here, it is taking a while. Again, it will vary wildly. Ubuntu does tend to take a while longer than some operating systems. Debian installs faster than Ubuntu, and Arch Linux installs faster than both Debian and Ubuntu. Because when you install Arch Linux, which we will cover, it doesn't install anything else other than what's absolutely needed. So, whilst we wait for this to finish, maybe leave a comment for what operating system you'd like to see installed in the future and how to install it. And just leave a comment talking about your day. Now we will sit and wait for this to finish. Okay, now that we are nearly done with the installation process, what we will do is just wait for this to finish off. Now, what this is doing is it's sorting out the grub bootloader for installation and proceeding further on from there. Now, these are the final steps. It's just sorting out the Linux kernel and the headers. So in this case, it's using the 5.15.0-107 generic kernel. And as such, it is preparing everything that it needs for it. Now, again, this very much does depend on your system. This took me a total of... It took my system roughly 25-30 minutes to do the bit where you will see sped up. But that's, again, dependent on your system, what you're doing, how you're going through the process of installing it, so on and so forth. Now, in this case, it's just a matter of, again, still sitting and waiting, but we're now at the final parts, as the kernel header is the last part to be set up and sorted out. As we can see here, the locales being sorted out, and it is just going through the final steps. Now, we can expect this to take hopefully not too long, but again, it's very much system dependent, as well as storage dependent, as well as the overall performance of your system put together. Now, as we can see here, it's generating the locale for English Australia. So again, locale generation does take a while within itself, but that is just because all locale generation takes a while. As we can see here, it appears to be generating the English locales. Hopefully only, yeah, it's just generating the English locales, yes, English locales. And it's just going through all of them, because we've selected only English and we only want the English locales. So that's what it's doing. Now, again, system dependent, does take a while. It's doing the UTF-8, not the ISO 8859-1. So they do differ. It just does depend on what you're using. So in this case, because I am using, because this is using the UTF-8 ones, it'll work no matter where I am in the world, no matter what keyboard I plug in, it will work. I could tell it, hey, look, this is a English Angolan keyboard, and it would still work because it's using the UTF-8 standard. Because there is a difference between ISO 8859-1 and ISO 8859-2. -1 is for Western Europe, -2 is for Eastern Europe. So there is a marginal but noticeable difference between the two keyboards. So what we're doing, again, is just waiting for it to finish. Again, locales take a bit of time, so we'll just have to sit and wait for it. Okay, now that the install process has complete, all we now have to do now is just click Restart Now. Now, what happens here will, again, vary depending on your hardware and your system setup, but for me, in this case, it is going through the process of unmounting everything and then booting. You will see a boot screen selector flash up on my screen, but again, yours will be different because mine is in a virtualized environment. Yours will be actual hardware. So again, this falls down to how fast it takes to do things on your system as opposed to my system. So things will vary between systems. So it is just a matter of waiting. As we can see here, please remove the installation media and then select enter. So what I need to do is come to the CD, click apply, and then reopen this at full screen, and then select enter. And we want to select our VirtIO disk. In this case, as we can see here, we can see the Ubuntu spinner logo. And then give it 20-30 seconds because it's first boot. Things do take a bit longer. As we can see here, it's going through the process. That is disk 5 because it created 5 disks for some unknown reason. I don't know why Ubuntu does this, but there we go. Again, mileage may vary, so on and so forth. So as we can see here, we have both spinners. And what we want to do is just wait. First boot does take a little bit longer because it's first boot. It's got to go through everything for the first time around, which is an expected outcome once again. So don't worry if things take a while. It is all right. There is no reason for panic. Now, as we can see here, the spinner has disappeared. So what we want to do is wait for the final booty up and hello entrance. So again, mileage varies. We now have the cursor. We're getting to the initial boot up. You may hear the the initial boot up sound. Ubuntu versions of this release in the 20 category do have a boot up sound that I'm not exactly a great fan of. I more prefer the Windows XP boot sound, but that's my personal preference. Yours will be different. So what we have here is just the initial setup. Would we like to connect an online account? No, we would not. No, we would not like to set up live patch. No, I do not want to send information to Canonical. That's just system metric tracking. My opinion on that one has been made known. We can now choose to install any additional software straight off the bat from here if we wanted to. But in this case, because I don't want to, I will just select done. And we will just do a quick change of the desktop so it fits the screen properly. Now, what I'm doing here will be the exact same thing as you're doing on your system, but you may have different resolutions available to you based off what you have. So to change the resolution, what you want to have done is clicked up here, then clicked on settings, and then a new version of Ubuntu is available. Would we like to upgrade? Don't upgrade. Yes, I know I can, but I will choose not to. So that's just going, hey, look, you're on version 20.04, long-term support. Why don't you take 22.04 long-term support? The answer is, in this case, no. So just select your resolution and then scroll down until it gets to your specific resolution. In my case, it's just 1920 by 1080 at the 16:9 aspect ratio. And now we have a full-size, fulfilled desktop environment. If we just checked it here, an error occurred with this. That's fine. Ubuntu Pro client, just ignore that. Ignore anything that says Ubuntu Pro. That's their attempt to try to sell you something. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. This has been how to install Ubuntu 20.04. I've been Nick. You've been amazing. When you use Linux, don't panic. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.